Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's Midday Western U.S. Regional Forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, the map you're looking at here shows statewide precipitation ranks for January 2020. And California had its 26th driest on record, and Washington State had its third wettest. We have 126 years of data going into these statewide numbers. I'd love to give this map to some of my former college students at the University of Illinois and ask them if they could, from the precipitation patterns they see here, kind of reproduce what the flow of the jet stream was doing, because we trained them to understand split flow patterns in the Pacific Ocean, and that ridge that's been sitting right off the coast here is quite evident in the flow, shoving much of the precipitation around like this, with the subtropical branch coming cranking in here, keeping this area very wet during the month of January. This particular pattern is one that is quite difficult to break down. And throughout this video, we're going to be asking ourselves the question, what does it take to break this down, and what do alternative patterns look like that we would like to see ourselves get into here? But overall, we can see that through the next week, this is total accumulated precipitation through next week, getting us all the way to next Tuesday. We don't see much of a change. Overall, right in through this area, higher atmospheric pressure is maintained, and so storm systems are kind of running around the periphery of this, hitting the northwest first, sliding through the northern Rockies, and then eventually reforming in the midsection of the country. And be honest, this particular pattern has created a massive flood threat for the parts of the mid-south and the southeastern part of the United States. So this is the boulder right here in the flow, this big high pressure cell, and on the downwind side of it, things come back together. So that would be the feature that would have to slide, have to move, and we'd have to break it down. But unfortunately, I feel like almost the entirety of the new year, I have not been able to give you a forecast that really does that. So as a consequence, we always look at this map. This is probably the most important map to keep an eye on as we finish a wet season. It's the basin average snow water content. We continue to see the numbers here in the Sierra Nevada reporting stations dropping. So now we're generally about 60 to 70% of normal for snowfall, while the flow coming in around this has really just piled up snow in the rest of the Intermountain West, especially allowing parts of Washington and Oregon really to recover from the earlier season deficits we were dealing with there. So this has kind of been a winter of two halves, the first half really targeting California, and the second half completely avoiding it. So if we look out over the next 10 days or so and we try to understand where this pattern is going, I want you to notice the large ridge that still sits here. It is in a little bit different shape and configuration, and that's because we've noticed over the last few model runs that the models are very consistent with what the polar vortex is doing, the stratospheric polar vortex, and what the response is in the lower atmosphere. Now the two are not necessarily connected, but the thing is that with the stratospheric polar vortex as strong and as stable as it currently is, that's one factor keeping a lot of the cold air over the North Pole. And as a consequence, we can see deep troughs developing here in Alaska. We're expecting some major winter storms, big Pacific storms to slam into Alaska. Greenland is the other feature. With the troughing that's happening there, we get what's called the positive North Atlantic oscillation. And what that keeps doing to the jet stream is it's doing something like this. And that flow has been relatively stuck, even though we technically don't call deep troughs over the northern latitudes blocking patterns. This pattern has been kind of stuffed in this configuration for a while. So what it does is the flow comes into British Columbia in the northwest and dives into the mountains before reinvigorating here to make big low pressure systems that go toward the north and east. And as a consequence of the presence of that high pressure cell, both at the surface and aloft, California, the flow is split around it, just that boulder in the flow of the stream here. So putting some numbers to this, looking out over the next week, so this gets us up to next Tuesday morning. The operational models right now are leaving a pretty wide void into this area, not even really hinting on many of these like little cutoff lows that sometimes come around the backside of a trough like this and sneak through. We're not even really seeing too much of that. But sliding up into coastal Oregon and Washington, we see widespread 1 to 4 inches plus of precipitation. And again, I kind of feel like a broken record, but with the trajectory coming in just like this, hitting the mountains in a perpendicular manner, the rain shadow showing up very well here. Northern Rockies really adding up the snow too, which is good. So places here getting between 10 and 24 inches of snow here in the Sawtooth, Northern Rockies getting the Blue Mountains, and the Cascades continuing to add up big snow here. Potential exists for well over 30 inches of snow at those higher elevations. Now meanwhile, we come to California and we just see that the Sierra Nevadas are going to continue to produce deficit overall in their snowfall as we progress here through the end of the month. Looking out into week 2, I want to know if the pattern has any shot at changing. And right now, the best model projections we have, and this follows the meteorology quite well, it appears as though this same pattern is on tap at least to the end of the month of February. And we're kind of running out of time in California. We're already past kind of the midway through our season in terms of accumulating precipitation. And so as a consequence, I'm getting extremely concerned about our upcoming water year in this state. Even though right now, reservoirs are full, it's going to make a major concern later on the year just due to the deficit we've built up so far. So this is week 2 precipitation patterns all the way out to the 25th of February. So if you watch, in the near term, the West Coast isn't dealing with too much. This animation just plays from plays from Tuesday through Wednesday and into early Thursday morning. We can see that it'll be early Thursday morning that we get our next kind of shot at precipitation in parts of the Pacific Northwest. So to see that, we got to go right over to our European model here. So dry start, and then we're watching right here Thursday afternoon for the first chance of a system sneaking through British Columbia, hitting parts of the Pacific Northwest. But as I've always said, it's watching the position of that surface high pressure cell. So as we move forward, it slides from here to here, and now the systems come running right over the top of it. So the end of this week, this is where we start to increase our precipitation amounts here for parts of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. And then you're going to see this weekend, this is Saturday morning, getting into Saturday afternoon and evening, getting into Sunday morning. That's probably our biggest push at precip over the next 7 days right there. So with that high pressure cell coming back into this region, the flow comes right over at Saturday morning, afternoon, and evening, getting into Sunday morning here and Sunday afternoon. So this is going to be a very unsettled weekend, quite a bit of snow and valley rain here, especially kind of through the I-5 corridor. So as we let that play through, look at where our high just sits. So getting into next week, we go back over into that same configuration. You can see our next disturbance here coming in Monday evening, lasting through Tuesday morning, and then here comes another one. This is next Wednesday. So while the Pacific Northwest really isn't getting a break at all in this pattern, California, that high pressure cell is too close, and this is just the wrong setup to be bringing us the precipitation that we want. What are our temperatures doing? Well, I'll show you the whole country here. Let's just keep our eye on high temperatures here the next several days. So this starts on Friday, a lot of 60s and 70s through the Central Valley here, and in the Northwest, a lot of 40s and 50s until you get over into Idaho and Montana where the temperatures drop off. But this for high temperatures in Montana in February, we would call this very mild for this time of year. But we will be seeing some changes. So this is Tuesday's highs, getting into Wednesdays. Look at what's going on with Montana. There's a system forming out of the New Mexico region and racing on up to the north and east, and it's going to draw on the backside of it a huge high pressure cell, and that is going to send Montana from a warm start to the week, especially the eastern half of Montana, back into single digits and even below. We don't see much of a change in California here. And as we move forward into the high temperatures on Thursday, the cooling is happening here in the Pacific Northwest, but still the Central Valley of California keeping its warmer conditions, 60s and 70s. Looks like Friday's probably where the thing starts to rebound in the high plains. The temperatures begin to rebound in the high plains, going back up into the 30s and 40s. And again, these temperatures here are very mild for this time of year. But overall, if you notice as I walk through this, we just don't see too much of a change along the western side of the United States after that cool shot comes through. All the action's over here, where the jet stream comes back together and takes off. The split is really keeping a very steady temperature profile here. So if we just look out over the next 5 days, we can see that the storehouse of colder air is up in Alaska. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So even though we got this cold shot coming in midweek, most of the western United States, with the exception of the Colorado Rockies that run up to Wyoming, are going to be seeing near average temperatures. And even as we go out to day 5 through 10, this is the main action. It's up here in Alaska. And we just see along the west, mostly on the coast, near average temperatures for this time of year, just cooler in the interior. And as we finally kind of look out as far as we can here, this is out to the 25th of February. It's the same story. The pattern is really favoring a very deep trough in Alaska with a ridge to its south. So the flow's coming in like this, and it's just not high enough amplitude for us to really bottom out in temperatures or skyrocket above high temperatures here in the western part of the United States. So if we wrap this up, let's look a little bit longer term. This is now looking at February 20th through March 20th. I do believe the bias here is a bit too cold. There just appears to be times when Alaska is trying to let out over the next month some colder air into the western United States. In other words, wanting to just amplify that pattern at times. So I don't want you to look at this and think that we're really into a cold bias for much of the month of March here. But I expect actually the pattern to look more similar to what we see right now. And about the biggest change that I can share with you in this map is the latest long-range European. So this is, again, February 20th to March 20th, has backed the dryness a bit to the west. Unfortunately, that still keeps California on the drier side of things, but I think the model is biasing what's going on in the Pacific Northwest a bit too dry here. I think we're going to see more of an active pattern in the Northwest as we progress through the month of March. But it's the same thing. The jet stream comes together here and takes off, keeping this region under major flood threat. So that pattern's having a difficult time to break down. And I want to talk to you about that pattern as we finish this up. Because a year ago, this is what our statewide precipitation ranks look like. California, you had your 5th wettest on record, and we were well above our climatological average on snowfall and on precipitation, which set up 2019 to have, in the grand scheme of things, much less of a problem when it came to water and water usage. But let me show you what the difference was. Over on the left, I have the pattern so far from the beginning of this year, and over on the right, I have February of 2019. You see the ridge is sitting here. I'll put an H over it right now with the trough somewhere between Alaska and British Columbia. So the flow is doing this, and then the subtropical flow comes around it, and then it rides up like that. So that's what we have right now. What we had a year ago, look at where the ridge is sitting. Look at the difference and compare it to where the trough is. The ridge is now right up into southern Alaska. It's here. And the trough moved. Where did it move to? It moved over the Pacific Northwest. So the flow did this. And as a consequence, well, we had much more action in terms of atmospheric rivers. We had flow coming around Hawaii and aiding in this, and as a result, we had a very, very wet February. Right now, at least as we get through the end of January, the end of February, and start the month of March, I don't know if we could get this to occur at this point. It's going to take a major breakdown in the temperature patterns over the North Pole. And we had that a year ago. We had a massive polar vortex disruption that made that possible. So different set of configuration this year in terms of the flow of the atmosphere. And I just wanted you to be able to see what we're watching carefully here. So I'll wrap it up there. Invite you back tomorrow to watch the long range forecast, but hope you do have a good finish to your week. Thank you.